Good morning. I'm Charles Chrestman. I hope you and yours are doing well. Today we'll be studying our second lesson for the new summer quarter, which features the book of Proverbs and the Song of Songs. If you would like to follow along on the focal passages, you will need a Bible or a copy of the 2020 Summer Personal Study Guide from Lifeway. I'm really glad you've chosen to join us this morning. I think we have a good lesson for you. A global positioning system, better known as a GPS, is a handy tool for getting directions. You simply provide the address and the GPS will have you on your way. It even tells you how long you'll have to travel before you reach your destination. Now the tool works well unless you decide you're going to ignore it and go in another direction. That's when we hear the rerouting announcement over and over again. Wouldn't it be nice if life worked that way? Unfortunately, it doesn't, and when we ignore instructions, especially clear instructions, we sometimes wind up in some real messes. Solomon gave us some clear instructions about how to live, and chapter 3 of Proverbs contains a lot of godly wisdom about living. So let's take a look at today's lesson. It focuses on how God provides us with direction, provided we place our trust in Him. A dissection of our focal passages indicates there are 4 things we need to note in today's lesson. The first is to obey the commandments. The second, trust the Lord. Third, honor the Lord with our possessions. And fourth, accept God's instruction and discipline. Now, the first section in today's lesson, our author entitled Remember. As you'll recall, when we started our study of Proverbs, it took 8 verses before Solomon started instructing his son. As we continue our study in chapter 3 this morning, we'll see Solomon still teaching his son how to follow the right path in life. Let's take a look at the first focal passage taken from chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. It reads, "My son, don't forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commands, for they will bring you many days, a full life, and well-being. Never let loyalty and faithfulness leave you. Tie them around your neck, write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will find favor and high regard with God and people." The first thing we notice is that Solomon wanted his teaching to be embedded in his son's heart. Tucking words away in our minds help us recall them, but storing them in our hearts and able to put them in practice many times without thinking. Solomon said keeping God's commands would bring us many days, full life, and well-being. An alter way of saying this is, our life would be filled with things that matter most, not things that matter least. In verses 3 and 4, we see Solomon talk about a life filled with integrity. Why? Because a life of integrity produces favor with God and with people. That gets us to the second part of today's lesson, which is entitled Trust. As Solomon continued to teach his son about integrity, he brought up the all-important trait called trust. Let's see what he had to say in verses 5 through 8. "Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not rely on your own understanding. In all your ways know Him, and He will make your path straight. Don't be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. This will be healing for your body and strengthening for your bones." As we see in these verses, one cannot be a person of integrity unless he or she can be trusted. Trust is important because it's the basis around which all human relationships evolve. Without trust, there can be no relationship. Sometimes in the world in which we live, the trust meter can run pretty low. Solomon knew that if a person trusted God's teaching and acknowledged Him in all ways, He would guide us through life in a healthy and refreshing way. In turn, this would result in a positive effect on our physical well-being as well as our spiritual growth. That gets us to the next section of today's lesson that's entitled Honor. Solomon Next point had to do with honoring God. As you know, honoring God involves acknowledging His authority in our lives and a willingness to submit to His will. Notice what Solomon had to say his son about honoring God. This comes from verses 9 and 10. Honor the Lord with your possessions and with the first produce of your entire harvest. Then your barns will be completely filled and your vats will overflow with new wine. I'm sure you've noted that Solomon has already pointed out that we honor God by acknowledging God's authority in our lives. He's already pointed out that we honor God with our minds by seeking His wisdom, and likewise we honor God with our hearts by following Him with devotion. However, honoring Him doesn't stop there. Solomon said that honoring Him involves giving Him a portion of the wealth we've accumulated. Solomon was not talking about tithing in these verses. He was talking about giving your best, which for some could be time, another talents, or someone else money. The people of Israel counted on their fields and vineyards to produce what they needed. Solomon encouraged his son to honor God with the first produce from the fields as an act of worship and humility. In turn, he said God would fill their barns and their vats would overflow. What a powerful statement. The fourth and final part of today's lesson is entitled Accept. Solomon knew his son would have difficulty with God's instruction at times. He even refers to the discipline that sometimes comes with God's instruction. As we look at the fourth passage taken from verses 11 and 12, notice what Solomon had to say to his son. Do not despise the Lord's instruction, my son, and do not loathe His discipline. For the Lord disciplines the one He loves, just as the Father disciplines the Son in whom He delights. Solomon's remarks to his son give us some insight as to how God's instruction at times is not what we really want or even have an interest in. In fact, it may sometimes be compared to the discipline a drill sergeant might give a soldier in an effort to prepare them for battle. In verse 12, Solomon said, The Lord disciplines the one He loves. Therefore, we should view Him as a caring Father who teaches us so we can be stronger in our walk with Him. Up until today, Solomon has made two paternal appeals. The first paternal appeal, which we studied last week, was do not join those who are greedy for unjust gain. The second paternal appeal was to seek wisdom. That is found in chapter 2. In today's lesson, Solomon made his third paternal appeal. This appeal was to fear or honor the Lord. Within this appeal are 6 sets of instructions. I'm not going to repeat them here. I want you to see if you can go back and identify them in today's focal passages. The two major themes, however, in this appeal were, of course, trust in the Lord and honor the Lord. In chapters 1 through 9, Solomon is credited with 9 discourses, of which today's lesson was part of Discourse 3, which is chapter 3, verses 1 through 35. Next week, we'll take a look at the second half of the discourse that is entitled Compassion Demonstrated, basically how a person should treat other people. I hope you will join us if your schedule permits. As we conclude today's lesson, I want to offer you a Gaelic blessing, the kind of blessing the pastor at the Lumberton First Baptist Church always offered those of us in the congregation as our worship service came to a close. So as our Sunday School class comes to a close today, I offer you this blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind always be at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face, and may the rains fall softly upon your fields. And may God hold you in the palm of His hand until we meet again. Amen. Thank you for joining.